right, you ready to study God's Word? Come on, get your Bibles out, technology, and open it up again to the book of Acts. We are this morning in our 12th message. I don't know if I'll number all of them along the way. I might do that. So by the time we get to the 28th chapter, and I'm averaging 3 messages a chapter, I'll stand before you and say, today we are at our 75th message in the book of Acts. So we will do it. We're going to keep marching through. Is that okay? Because I tell you, it has helped me so much just to march through a book and just to keep marching through, because it ends up forcing me to come to topics that maybe I might be tempted to skip. So it has forced me to just say, nope, it's come up, so we're going to deal with it. And today, we begin Acts chapter 5, and I will simply warn you in advance that there will be some solemnity in the message this morning. I'm going to do my best to find comedic pauses so that you can relax. But truthfully, this will be one moment in the book of Acts, and there might be a couple more. There's a lot of exciting things that happen in the book of Acts that will stir you and cause your faith to arise, but there are going to be a moment or two in the book of Acts where great solemnity is going to have to be exercised, because we're going to be dealing in these passages, and we're just getting to it as we get to it, but we're going to deal with the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord. Now, I've told you through the years many farm-related stories, and I want to give you just a little analogy before we get started. When I grew up summers on the farm, whenever there was a rainy day, I woke up and it was raining outside, I knew instantly that we would not be working in the field, because you couldn't get in the field on a rainy day. And so on rainy days, what was reserved was that we would have to work with cattle. And cattle are not bright animals. And so that was never a real joy to know that you were going to get up and put boots on and stand in you-know-what up to your kneecap. But that's what we did. We worked with cattle. And because a cow is not a smart animal, it is a creature of habit, and to try to get it to do something out of its routine was never easy. I mean, these are big animals. They don't get out of their routines easily, and it was difficult to work with them. And there may be, if there are PETA people watching or here this morning, you're probably going to be aggravated with this story, but we would use electric cattle prods. We would. Now, they were humane. They weren't used to torture animals. But you had to get these animals to move. They had to go in certain directions in order to mix them up and change them up. And I wasn't even sure why we were mixing and changing them up at times. We were just doing this. But we would use these electric cattle prods in order literally to wake them up. Wake up. This is the direction you need to go. This is where you need to begin to move. And it jolted them. It actually would make them twitch. It jolted them. They would even move. And as you might surmise, it worked pretty well, that electric cattle prod. Now, as we're opening up Acts chapter 5 today, I'm going to warn you that this story will be to your system similar to being hit with an electric cattle prod. I can assure you the reality of it was, to the early church, just that jolting. It was a wake-up call. It jolted them back to the reality of the moment, that this happening that took place with the Lord was not just some religious game. This wasn't just something that was meant to bless you. It wasn't just health, wealth, and prosperity. I mean, I'm going to read you a story this morning that, I'm going to be honest with you, I just don't hear this one preached much. Reason, it's just not a seeker-sensitive story. But the truth is, God seemed to accomplish his purpose in what he was endeavoring to do in the early church. So I'm going to put it on the table, and let's wrestle a little bit with what God's saying and what he wants to say to us today. And I entitled the lesson this morning, Where Has the Fear Gone? Where has the fear gone? Acts 5, beginning with verse 1, we read, "But a certain man named Ananias, with Sapphira his wife, sold a possession, and he kept back part of the proceeds, his wife also being aware of it, and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back part of the price of the land for yourself. While it remained, was it not your own? And after it was sold, was it not in your own control? Why have you conceived this thing in your heart? You've not lied to men, but to God." Then Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and breathed his last. So great fear came upon all those who heard these things. You think? And the young men arose and wrapped him up and carried him out and buried him. Now it was about 3 hours later when his wife came in, not knowing what had happened, and Peter answered her, "Tell me whether you sold the land for so much." You are understanding they were in this conversation. She said, "Yes, for so much." Then Peter said to her, "How is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out." Then immediately she fell down at his feet and breathed her last. And the young men came in and found her dead, and carrying her out, buried her by her husband. So great fear came upon all the church and upon all who heard these things. Where has the fear gone? Now, last week, if you'll recall, we ended a story in chapter 4 that was going to bring context to what we're reading here. In fact, in chapter 4, we are told that great grace, everyone say that again, say great grace. Great grace, not just grace, great grace was upon the church. People we were reading were doing unselfish, amazing things in order to meet the needs of their fellow brothers and sisters, as well as financing the mission and the vision of the church. This was all voluntary. I'll say it again. This was voluntary. There was not anything mandatory to it. People were hearing from God. The Holy Spirit was talking to people. He was directing them, and they were responding. They were being obedient to what the Holy Spirit was doing. And at the end of chapter 4, there was this person by the name of Barnabas. Apparently, God spoke to him about selling a piece of property and giving it to the church. Well, it must have been a notable thing, because all of the selling and giving that was going on was not recorded. There were not specific instances of all the selling and giving, except for just a couple, one of them being Barnabas. So this act that Barnabas did had to be a notable thing. And it was inspired by the Holy Spirit, as Luke was writing all of these things, to record it for us. So we see the name of Barnabas. And I suspect that the reason it was recorded for us was that this great act of faith that Barnabas entered into, this great sacrifice, this great obedience, would end up being a springboard for Barnabas that God would use to open up these incredible doors for ministry, because you do know that Barnabas will be heard from again in the book of Acts. He'll be one of the notable missionaries that gets to hang out with Paul, with which to disseminate the gospel all over the known world at the time. And so at this time, Barnabas maybe was not as well known. But I just wonder if this notable act of sacrifice and obedience, I wonder if this act was not the beginning of something God big in Barnabas' life that the Lord used to open up a door. And obviously, when God begins to open up doors for people and he begins to let them be influencers and all of those sorts of things, he would obviously receive some public affirmation, some public recognition. I'm sure that through this act, he garnered incredible influence. I mean, he was a testimony. He was someone you could point to. It was someone that God used in an amazing way. And so Barnabas becomes the context for the story with which we run into today of Ananias and Sapphira. Because Ananias and Sapphira sees what's taking place with Barnabas. And apparently, God speaks to them. The Holy Spirit speaks to them in a similar way concerning a piece of property, but in the case of Ananias and Sapphira, the outcome is totally different. This couple dies, and the ushers had to carry them out. Guess the ushers had an important job that day, what didn't they? They just carrying people out of church. So what's the point of the story? Why would God do such a thing? What about mercy, Pastor? You know, I thought this was about mercy and grace and love. And, you know, we always hear these words bantered around. I thought it was about grace and love and mercy. I mean, what's going on here in the life of the early church? Well, first off, let's let's just unwrap this by starting at this point. Let's start with Ananias and Sapphira's character defects. Let's start here first. Ananias and Sapphira's character defects. Let me just share a couple things we know from this passage of Scripture. Number one is this: they intended to deceive. You have to understand there was an intention here. The account tells us in verse 4 that this lie was conceived in his heart. This wasn't accidental, wasn't ignorance, wasn't something that slipped his mind. Oh yeah, I forgot I was going to do that. Yeah, it just totally slipped my mind. We're not talking ignorance, oversight, accident. There's not anything here that would mitigate what happens. There was an intentional act inside of Ananias of trying to deceive God. God spoke to them. You have to understand, God was speaking to people in these days. And they had apparently made a promise to God. Now, we don't see them in their prayer closet. We don't see where it happened. I don't know if Ananias was in the shower and God's speaking to him and he goes, "Oh, yes, Lord." And maybe then he started thinking of all the possibilities. But whatever took place, there was a commitment before the Lord. And that is why Peter would say to him, he says, "You've not lied to me. You've not even lied to the church. You've lied to God." I would suppose that all of our natures have the propensity to fudge on things. Anybody in the room besides me ever fudge? You know what that is? You know the word fudge? Kind of fudge. It's not like, you don't consider it a big lie. I'm just fudging. Just a little bit. Maybe it's by omission, maybe it's by embellishment. I mean, who hasn't been guilty of working the truth? After all, they hadn't been totally disobedient. They partially gave what they promised God. But you know what we start learning here in this story? In fact, we learn it in a dramatic way. Listen, partial obedience is still total disobedience. Did you get that? Partial obedience is still total disobedience. Fudging on the Lord. Has he ever spoken to you? I don't know if he has or he hasn't, but has the Lord ever quickened your spirit or spoke to you about something and you said yes, only somewhere along the way you wanted to amend the deal? It's kind of like that foxhole promise. If you'll get me out of this one, Lord, I'll serve you the rest of my life. And you get out and you serve him about once every 6 weeks. Are you following me? It's fudging. It's interesting. You don't think that this may happen, but just in a notable situation, just recently, just within the last few weeks, I received an email. And I share this, and you know, no one's name will be mentioned, but it was from a former member. Now, this is years ago. In fact, it was so many years ago that probably if I were to throw out, and I would never throw out a name, but even if I were, I'm not even sure anyone would know the name. But I received an email from a former member. And they decided that the season was over and they wanted to go to another church. And let me just say, there's nothing wrong with that. Seasons work. I know people journey with us for a while, and then for various reasons, the journey here ends and they want to go somewhere else. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. And there's no hard feelings. I mean, certainly we want people to stay with us in longevity, but I understand that seasons change and people, they leave and they come, and that's church life. So I get that. And so their season had ended, and they went on to another church. But they sent me an email just recently, years ago now. And the reason they were contacting me was because they wanted me to refund all their contributions. See, wouldn't you like to be on my email account? You'd be amazed at what I get. They wanted me to refund. In fact, they even gave me ideas as to how I could do that. And if you're watching by YouTube, I got your email. I got it. See, if they're bold enough to do that, well, I'm bold enough to talk about it. Why not? See, the thing that kind of just struck me at the moment, though, obviously God didn't really own their resources. Obviously. He hadn't really spoke to them. And equally obvious, they were now wanting to amend the deal. That's just dangerous, folks. That's dangerous on so many levels. See, Ananias wasn't condemned because he wanted to keep some of the sale. He wasn't condemned because he wanted to keep it. It wasn't like he had to. He didn't have to give a dime of it. Nobody was saying to him, nobody was pounding on him saying, you must do this. Nobody said that to Ananias. This wasn't the issue. The issue was he said something to God. And now that he said it to God, he said, I don't know, I don't want to do that anymore. And we lie to each other so easily, we think we can lie to him because he's just like this big granddad in the sky who's going to wink at us. So they had a character defect. They intended to deceive. Number 2, I think they had a desire for prominence. See, the implication of their deception was that they wanted the affirmation of the church without really entering into the obedience or the sacrifice that God asked. And there's a leadership principle at work here. If God is calling you into ministry, he was calling Barnabas into ministry. God is calling you into a leadership position in the church. Listen to me, you're going to have to embrace the fact that you're going to be asked to do some things that others may never be asked to do. Amen. It will involve certainly your finances, but it will involve your life, your lifestyle, because you're going to be an example to the flock. Barnabas was going to become an example to the whole church. Ananias and Sapphira, perhaps they wanted the visibility, perhaps they wanted the prominence, perhaps they wanted the affirmation, but what they didn't want was the sacrifice. They didn't want the total obedience. That's serious. You know, Paul would later say in 1 Timothy chapter 3, he would use these words. He says, it's a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it's a fine work he desires to do. So what Paul says is this: if you want to be an influencer, if you want to be a leader, if you want to be someone who's giving leadership in the kingdom, Paul says it out loud. He says, you've desired a really good thing. It's a good thing. However, you can't lead people without leading in your obedience or your sacrifice or your integrity, especially in the area of money. This is what Jesus said. I'm going to quote, is it okay? I'm going to quote Jesus, the epitome of love, grace, and mercy. I'm going to quote him right now. This is what he says. He says, therefore, Luke 16, if you've not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, or meaning money, who will commit to your trust the true riches? In other words, if you can't handle your finances before the Lord and even before the watching world and with the world, who's going to hand you that which is eternally valuable? How you handle money in the presence of God determines your future. Your money is one of the indicators of whether God can reveal deeper things to you. Ananias and Sapphira wanted visibility. They wanted affirmation without having to follow through on their obedience and their sacrifice. And listen, and this is just simple. Barnabas fulfilled it. Ananias and Sapphira didn't. The simple principle that if you're going to be a leader, leadership means you lead. You're up front, leading in it. Number 3, their other defect was the complicity they had in their sin. The thought struck me, which I believe is important, that in those days, and you know how it worked in the first century, only men transacted business. It was a male-dominated culture. It's not to say that women couldn't, that there weren't Proverbs 31 women who were doing business. I'm not saying that it wasn't there, but primarily men transacted the business. So I'm confident, knowing the nature of how all of this worked and how women of the first century were treated, that Ananias probably conceived the plan. The word says he conceived it in his heart. So he initiated the plan, Ananias. Listen. Sapphira may not have conceived it, but she was complicit in it. Now I want ladies to listen to me now. I believe in headship. I believe in submission. I believe in covering. I believe that there is a divine order of the household and the men are to be leaders. I believe that. I have also seen a twisting of these concepts. So I'm going to untwist something right now. If your husband is leading you to sin before the Lord, you're not required to submit to his sin. Did you hear that? There are women right now who think that by being submissive, they're going to follow their husband off a cliff. I'm looking at you and saying, I don't see that in God's word. I just don't see it. You submit as unto the Lord. Is the Lord going to lead you off a cliff? No, well, some of these things that Paul said later were very important. And so you're not, if your husband decides to sin, you may not be able to stop him. You may not be able to get the thing changed around. But you are not required, hear me when I say this, you are not required to submit to his sin. Listen, vice versa. If my wife wants to go off in sin and she henpecks me to come into it, it doesn't matter. Amen. Because I have watched women follow husbands off cliffs under the twisting of submission. Listen to me. I mean, I can't go to church anymore because my husband doesn't like it. Listen, you know what? Then maybe he's not going to like it. But how else will you sanctify him by your good works unless you obey the Lord? The account shows us to share in your spouse's sin is to share in its repercussion. To willingly participate in a deception and say, well, I'm just along for the ride. He's the deceiver. Me, I've just hitched my wagon to this thing. Listen, that's not in the Bible. Ignorance. Now, you may be ignorant to it, and I believe God covers ignorance. But listen, complicity is a whole other thing. The fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord. Where has the fear of the Lord gone? Now let's jump into what everybody's asking. Why did God kill him? It just seems over the top. I was reading this and I thought, wow, this seems really over the top. Especially in a day when we find churches and Christians emphasizing grace and mercy and tolerance and love. Anybody that's out there knows kind of how it's working. Jesus is the grand enabler. He is the tolerant. Oh, Jesus would do it. Oh, if Jesus was here, he would certainly do that. It's amazing what we put on Jesus. And so we've created this Jesus in our own image. In fact, I'm going to mess up your mind just a little bit more this morning with the Bible, because the Bible says that great grace was upon the church. Great grace. So there's just not grace. Great grace was upon the church, and it was in this atmosphere of great grace that took out Ananias and Sapphira. Kind of redefines the grace message, doesn't it? Jesus, hear me now, Jesus is shooting people down in the congregation. That was the spirit of Jesus. Great grace. There's Ananias and Sapphira. Dead as a doornail. Whatever happened to this tolerant, non-judgmental guy that we're all being told is who is allowing us and enabling us to continue in our disobedience? Are you seeing a picture here? You've got to get this picture. Why? But why such a severe response? Why isn't it like what everyone else seems to be saying? Why did God kill them? I'm going to give you several reasons here why God killed them. I'm going to answer the question. Why are they dead? Number one is this: to connect the dots. Connect the dots. Interesting. Peter gets a word of knowledge. I really believe it's a word of knowledge as he confronts Ananias on this thing. And it was important for this deception to shake out this way, in my opinion, in order for everyone to know that God was at work in this situation, and there would be no mistaking as to why what was about to place was taking place. I've often said that I wish God would discipline or act immediately, whether it be with me or with anyone else. I wish God would act immediately, because that would help us connect the dots faster, wouldn't it? If you were disobedient and all of a sudden like lightning just went, you would connect that dot, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? If you were walking along and you were thinking about some sin or something, and then all of a sudden this crash comes right in front of you that you barely miss. I think people would start waking up if it happened like that. Now, I'm going to deal with this here in just a minute in a little more full way, but the reason people mock God is because the repercussion today seems to take so long. The Lord was making a point. Disobedience will kill you. The Lord was emphasizing exactly that day. It's interesting because once Ananias and Sapphira died, it said they took him out and they buried him. There wasn't a funeral service. How are you going to eulogize these guys? Well, here lies Ananias and Sapphira. They lied. They're dead. Don't do that. Bye. What do you do with that? You understand? Everyone knew they had disobeyed. They disobeyed God. It killed them. What else could be said? It was a forever lesson recorded in the Scripture. And I'm telling you, I'm convinced the Lord was saying at that moment to the early church, He says, yes, there's great grace upon the church, but let me help you connect the dots. You do not lose your fear of the Lord. Second reason. The Lord was preserving purity in the community. There's a scriptural principle that the Lord will deal with individuals at times for the sake of the community. We find this in the Old Testament, for example, Achan. Achan was an Old Testament example of a guy in Joshua chapter 7. Achan was a guy who disobeyed the Lord. They were battling, the Israelites were battling the city of Ai. They were marching their way through the promised land. They'd gone through Jericho. They got to Ai. And the Lord said to Joshua, and Joshua communicated to everyone else, you were to utterly destroy the inhabitants, and you were to take no spoils with you, for they will be an accursed thing. And so they go into Ai, and what happens as they're battling and some other things are happening, that Achan takes some spoils and he hides them underneath his tent. And I want to preach a sermon. Someday I'm going to be able to, when I'm out of the book of Acts, sometime years from now, I'm going to preach a message entitled, What's Under Your Tent? Because he puts some of the spoils under his tent, and that one act of disobedience caused the entire nation of Israel to lose the battle at Ai. It's a powerful reminder that the people of God are a covenant community. Achan was uncovered. And again, it seems over the top, but he was killed that day. It seems so outlandish to even read such things in the Bible because it just so smacks us in the face in our westernized, self-made concepts of who God is and who Jesus is. But the point of the story is that there is a leavening aspect to disobedience that at times must be addressed. It's hard. It's hard in our Americanized, individualized Christianity to somehow say that one person's sin affects everyone else. But that's exactly what the Bible's teaching. See, the reason the American church is losing cultural battles is the same reason Joshua and the Israelites lost at Ai. It's because people got things underneath their tent. The church has things underneath its tent. We can't win our battles anymore. Oh yeah, we'll preach Jericho and shout and God wants to drop walls, but we won't preach Achan and Ai and how the Israelites lost the battle because there were people who were keeping things under their tents. God called it accursed. And you aren't winning battles, and the reason we aren't winning battles as a church and the reason we're impotent as a church is because the church at large is out of order. It's the concept of leaven. Leaven the Bible speaks about, and those of you that bake know that leaven is like a yeast that causes the dough to rise. It's small. Leaven is very small in size, but its influence is obviously large. In Scripture, most of the time, leaven is referring to imperceptible, almost sin that is affecting the body. Paul would write in 1 Corinthians 5, listen to this. He says to the church at Corinth, he says, it's actually reported that there's sexual immorality among you. And such sexual immorality as is not even named among the Gentiles. Can you imagine? He looks at the church and he says, what you guys are doing is worse than the world. That a man has his father's wife. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, when you are gathered together along with my spirit, with the power of our Lord Jesus Christ, listen to what he says, deliver such a one to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. That's the New Testament.
Yes, it is.
In other words, what Paul's saying is this, the one is messing you all up. So it's time to deal with this leavening effect because what happens is it's beginning to seep into everyone else. Listen, I know of a story where the pastors were in sexual sin and it began to leaven the congregation until it finally got down to the youth group, and in 1 year there was over a dozen young teens that got pregnant in that youth group. How could that happen in 1 year? It's because a little leaven leavens the whole lump. It says, deliver them, that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord Jesus. Your glorying's not good. Do you not know that a little leaven, he says, leavens the whole lump? Therefore, purge out the old leaven. Now, that's not seeker sensitive, is it? It's pretty radical. That doesn't mean you sort of, we don't have our own spiritual TSA at the door and you kind of pat everyone down and make them go through the metal detector and, you're not coming in here unless you're cleared. You got your clearance. We're not talking about that. Leaven doesn't happen when lost people come to church. That's not leaven. We want lost people to come to church. We want you to hear the gospel. You're not leavening. If you're a lost person, you're not leavening the congregation. Leavening is when you're of influence. And you're hiding things under your tent. And it's beginning to affect the congregation. So the Lord wanted to make sure this type of deception that Ananias and Sapphira had entered into did not spread. Certain disobedience at times has to be cut off. Nobody wants to link up with another person who's compromised or under a curse. Would you really grab and link arms with people that you know are under a curse? It's not. I'll give you an example. For example, I look at our leaders here at Legacy and I ask our leadership that they commit and they must commit to tithing. I ask that of leaders. Now, I want the whole congregation to tithe. That would be a desire because God's desire is that you do that. But I expect my leadership to. Why? It's because I'm not linking shields with people who are under a curse. It's just that simple. Why would I do that? Am I a fool? Am I a fool that the devourer is after you and now I'm going to link up with you and go into battle with you? Really? I understand this is an electric cattle prod. Why would I go to battle with somebody who's treacherous? Why would I do that? Why would I walk with somebody arm in arm when the heavens are closed over you? I don't want that in my life. You do what you want to do. It's America and God bless you, but I'm linking up with those who want an open heaven. I'm linking up with those that the devourer is being rebuked. I'm linking up with those that understand obedience. Amen. Amen. Now some call that hard. I call that biblical. And God is calling that out. This is getting emphasized. You got to understand this is great grace. Don't look at me and say, you're not preaching grace. Ha! Look what God was preaching that day. He's killing them. Sure, the church is a hospital for the broken and the diseased and down and outers. But listen, doctors cannot be disseminating the sickness. Are you following the analogy? Amen. Number 3. I promised I wasn't going to shout too this morning again. Number 3, why did he kill him? And I've already mentioned it, to emphasize the fear of the Lord. The scripture tells us in verse 11 that great fear came upon all the church. I'm sorry, I laughed. I'm saying to myself, well, yeah. There was great grace. At the same time, there was great fear. Hear me, those two concepts can exist at the same time. One does not disqualify the other. We are living in an era where there is no longer any fear of the Lord. We have people espousing grace that do not have the fear of the Lord. I believe in grace. I believe in great grace. I wouldn't be here had it not been for the grace of God. I'm not living under like God's this cosmic cop and he's going to beat me up at the slightest moment. But let me tell you something. What grace did in me was it produced a fear of the Lord. Amen. Peter clearly said, Satan, Ananias, Satan is at work in your heart. I love Pastor Rod. He's our overseer. He's going to be with us in November, and I'm looking forward to him and Marvelous Mary being with us. If you've never met Pastor Rod, you're going to want to be here. God broke the mold with that man. I won't even try to describe it. You hear everyone chuckling. You don't even know if you've never met him. He's been coming to us now for nearly 10 years. Hard to believe it's been 10 years that we've been in relationship. And I've watched him come prophetically to many people over the years at the altar. And you know this to be true. He'll do that, and he'll pray for people, and he loves to pray for people to be blessed and people's prosperity. And let me just say this, that I don't know that I have ever done this, or maybe I could ever do this, but he's just got an apostolic boldness about him that he'll pray for people, and he'll look him in the eye, and he'll look at him, and he'll say, are you tithing? Because he says, he'll say these, he goes, because I'm not going to pray that God will bless you when you're in disobedience. I'm going, just don't get a visitor that day, okay? Just Just you get some of our really, stalwart folks. But listen to me when I say this. I have watched people, and I hate to say it, I know their situation and I know they're not tithing, and I have watched them look him in the eye and say yes. You know what you ought to thank God for? You ought to thank God that great grace is not over the Church of America. Because there'd be dead people. You can't do that at the altars of the Lord. You would be better off in repentance and saying, no, I should be, but I'm not. You'd be better off in repentance and let us pray, and God in mercy will come, and you'd be amazed at what God will do. But to be before the Lord, not even speak the truth, not to man, but to God. You say, well, Pastor, then why don't people die today? And I'll end with this. Why don't people die today? Because if God were to act this fast today, we'd be tripping over bodies. I tell you, every Sunday morning, we'd be tripping over people. That was a comedic moment, by the way. Why don't people die like that today? Well, I'm just going to tell you, number one, it's the patience of God. You want to talk about a merciful, gracious, patient God? Scripture gives us insight. 2 Peter 3, it says, the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering towards us. God's patient. He's not willing that any should perish, but that all would come to repentance. Aren't you glad that Jesus isn't Wyatt Earp? I marvel at the patience of God in our era. But the story of Ananias and Sapphira underscores that while God is long-suffering, it does not mean he's eternally suffering. His patience has an end. It may be greater than man's, I'm quite sure it is. But there is an end. The day of grace will come to an end at some point. It's over. God says this is the moment everything's wrapped. He's patient. I'm so glad he's patient. Aren't you glad he's patient? I'm glad he's patient with me. Thank you, Lord, for being patient with me, because I know I'd probably be one that would have been carried out. But thanks for being patient, giving me a chance to connect the dots. Second reason people don't die today that you need to know, and I put down here, some do die, just not as fast. This is what I mentioned earlier when I was talking about connecting the dots. It's easy to make the connection when somebody disobeys and then they fall over dead. You know, they're disobedient and then they're gone. That's easy. People get that. That type of scene makes sense. I mean, you could be really dense this morning. But if you knew what was going on and someone keels over dead, you would say to yourself, I can make that connection. But the problem is, most folks who walk in disobedience are not dying instantly. So connecting the dots is much harder. And truthfully, it's deceiving because for many, they think they're getting away with it. What they do not realize is they're simply dying on the installment plan. Their disobedience takes its toll. Incrementally, imperceptibly. They're like the proverbial frog in the kettle. They're swimming around thinking life is good and the water's warm, not understanding that it's about ready to boil them. That's why it's even more dangerous, because they cannot make the connection. So when people die, it's easy to write it off for other reasons. You know, people die, and we have funeral services today, and we preach just about everybody into heaven. I mean, really, I've listened to people get preached in heaven that's just been quite remarkable. And we don't say anything, because who's going to speak ill of the dead? And what we do is we tell everybody their best qualities, how great a person they were. But the secret is they may have died before their time because there was no integrity before the Lord. But you see, we don't see that because it was incrementally. It was on the installment plan. People forget about Samuel and Saul. Samuel, as you'll recall, prophesied that Saul was to utterly destroy the Amalekites. He told Saul in a similar story to the Achan story that, Saul, you're to take nothing from the Amalekites. But after the battle, Saul spared the king, and he kept the best of the spoils. And so when Samuel comes walking up, Saul comes running out to him in 1 Samuel 15. He's running out and he's saying, "Oh, Samuel, 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 how good it is that you have come, and we've done all that God commanded us to do," with a big old grin on his face. Because you know Saul would have been the biggest giver to Samuel's ministry. And Samuel said, "Well, if you've been so obedient, then why is it that I hear the bleating of sheep and oxen in my ears?" And then Saul, being the good blame shifter that he was, he instantly said, "Well, you got to understand the people. It's the people. They really wanted to do it. And hey, what can I do if that's what the people want? You got to give them what they want." And so he blamed the people. And then when Samuel kind of zeroes in on that, Saul begins to spiritualize it again. And he says, "Well, really, if you think about it, it probably was a good thing to do, because we can take some of this spoil and we can offer it as a sacrifice to the Lord." And so now he's spiritualizing his disobedience. And that's when Samuel looked at him and he begins to speak some interesting words. You got to understand, here's what Saul worked under this principle, which isn't biblical, but this is the principle he worked under. He said, "It is better to ask forgiveness than to be obedient." God isn't wanting you to do something for him that he says not to do, but God just doesn't get what I'm trying to do here. No, God gets fully what you're trying to do here. Obey him. And this is what Samuel says. Samuel says, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord. Better to obey, is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. You understand, when you're in disobedience, you're in witchcraft. Stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry, because you've rejected the word of the Lord. He has also rejected you from being king. Now listen, that's what Samuel prophesies. And then he continues, and I put this passage on the screen, beginning with verse 26. Samuel says to Saul, because Saul wants now Samuel to come and sacrifice. You know, Saul knows he's up a creek, and he's got no prophet with him. And so he's begging Samuel to come with him, and he's going, "Please, please forgive me. Come with me, sacrifice. Tell me it's all going to be okay. Tell me that I'm still okay even in my disobedience. Please come sacrifice with me, Samuel." And Samuel says these words. He says, "I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel." And as Samuel turned around to go away, Saul seized the edge of his robe, and it tore. So Samuel said to him, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you." Now listen to me. This is the point of the story I'm getting at. Here's the key. Listen to me. Saul disobeyed that day. It was 10 years before the repercussion of losing his kingdom caught up to him. It was a decade. Now, it would have been much better illustration, I think, if the Lord would have just sent some lightning on him right then. That would have woke up the whole nation, huh? That would have been so much better for everybody to have connected that dot. That when God says it, he means it, and you need to obey it. And look at that. He disobeyed, and instantly God zapped him. Praise Jesus. But that's not what happened. It was 10 years. And I can assure you, in 10 years, that moment that took place had faded from everyone's mind. And they no longer connected that dot. Now, you may say this morning, "Well, Pastor, you trying to scare me?" In a way, yeah. Yeah. It's time to renew the fear of the Lord in the church. He loves us. He cares for us. He's a gracious Father to us. He blesses us as a good father would bless his children. He's healed my body. He's healed my household. He's prospered our hands. My God, he's given you breath this morning. Can you say amen? Amen. Man, you're going to go out to lunch today. You're going to eat at a buffet. You're going to eat yourself silly. God loves you. But we've lost the fear of the Lord. We got people living in egregious sin and they don't think anything about it anymore. And what do? We just march our way up to the Lord's table and we take the elements and we pop them in our mouth with dirty, uncircumcised hands. We lie before God without any thought. There is no thought in anyone's mind in most churches in America that they can walk out of worship service and go do their sin. There is not an inkling of a thought that there would ever be any repercussion on their life. It's not even on our radar, and God knows we've created a Jesus that could not even do that in any way, shape, or form. And the only way you get to that point is when you just neglect reading certain passages of the Bible. People disobey, and they say, it's all good, I'm under grace. Well, Ananias and Sapphira were under great grace. And they carried him out. And lastly, number 3, and I'm almost done. Reason people don't die anymore is, sadly, there's just a lack of God's manifest presence. Truthfully, there's just not the same sense of God's presence and power today like there was in the early church. We all want to say we want the power of God to show up again. Boy, wouldn't it be great to have the book of Acts show up again? Yeah, really. Really. What does revival look like? Well, people are saved, people are healed, people are filled with the Spirit, and people die. That's revival. Now, I told you in the beginning, and I gave you fair warning, the book of Acts are going to have scores of exciting, happy stories, and I will be so glad to get to the next one. But we can't skip over the jolting ones. The story was meant to underscore that the Lord was bringing incredible liberty. He was bringing change. He was destroying an old, dead religious system that could no longer produce life or save the people. He said he would destroy the temple and then rebuild it in 3 days in his own resurrection. So there was incredible liberty and newness and change and joy and all the things that we want to underscore, and mercy and benevolence and compassion. But listen to me, nowhere in all of that did they lose the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord. I don't want you to live under like God's this cosmic cop that's always beating on you, because some people's guilt mechanisms are so great it doesn't take much to make them feel guilty. And I'm really not so much talking to those that really feel guilty at the drop of a hat, because for you, God probably speaks to those people, and you probably live and need to spring out of some of that guilt. But there are some people who live under absolutely zero guilt. They do what they want, when they want, how they want, and they don't give a flip, and there's no guilt there at all. And I am telling you, it is you that needs to hear the fear of the Lord. There should be a healthy fear of the Lord. Most of the time, I'd say 95% of the time in my life, 95% of the time, I serve God because there is joy, and there's purpose, and there's gratefulness, and all the positive things. But can I just tell you that and I think it's healthy, that every now and then, should my mind even begin to wander in a direction that it ought not go, every now and then, when that may happen, there's something about the fear of the Lord. Come back. Oh, I might not die that day, but I know enough to know there's a payday someday. We're a New Testament church. Believe in the fullness of the Holy Spirit. The book of Acts, I want it to come alive. And it will, along with the fear of the Lord.